I live near the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, and I've been hiking there more times than I can count. But I had never gone camping there, not until last summer. It was the beginning of July, and my friend Andrew wanted to go camping. We decided to hike a trail called the Chimney Tops, and then drive a couple of miles down the road and stay at the campsite there. The plan was to meet at noon, but Andrew was late, as he often is, and so we ended up meeting at 3. We ended up taking my car, and after getting inside, I noticed that the gas tank wasn't full. Not a problem. We would just fill it on the way to the mountains. So we set off on the hour-long trip to the Smokies. Only it wasn't an hour-long trip. We started talking, and before I knew it, I had turned on autopilot. We had missed our turn and were driving through Dandridge, a little town completely out of our way. Making a quick course correction, we turned south and picked up the pace. By the time that we arrived at the trailhead, it was around 7, and the sun was well on its way towards the western horizon. We geared up and completed the steep 4-mile hike, 2 there and 2 back, in a record of 2 hours. Even with a brief stop at the top to enjoy the beautiful view as we arrived back at the car, I realized that in the rush to make up for time lost on our detour, we had forgotten to stop and fill up the gas tank. Getting inside the car, I saw that the tank was well below empty, and it had been for some time. Not a problem. I thought the campground is only 2 miles downhill, or just close there. We packed up and drove to the campground, only to find out that the campground had closed at around 8, an hour and a half ago. At this time it was getting dark, and a quick glance at Andrew confirmed that he was determining to camp out. Campground or no campground. So we drove back to the trailhead, hoping beyond hope that the car would get us there, and also repeating the phrase, "Let's worry about gas in the morning." It was around 10 when we arrived at the trailhead for the second time, and it was very dark. We unpacked the hammocks we would be using and started out on the trail. Lucky for us, we had hiked this trail before and we knew the area well. A river runs underneath the trail, about 30 yards in from the road, and so we decided that instead of camping on the trail, we would climb from boulder to boulder in the river until we found a suitable place to bed down. Using the one flashlight we had, we ended up finding a small island in the middle of the river, and we declared it our campsite. Now, from the moment that we got there, I sort of had an uneasy feeling about the area, but I figured it was just nerves, so I didn't mention it to Andrew. Being in a national park, we didn't make a fire. We ate a small meal, hung the trash in a plastic bag across one fork of the river down from us, and we sat down on a boulder next to a very small waterfall. Then, things went wrong. I could tell that Andrew was feeling uneasy about something, so I asked him if he was doing all right. He just looked over at me and said, "I swear I keep hearing a girl's voice. Do you hear anything?" I'd known Andrew for a while. I could tell he was being serious. No," I replied. "I don't hear it. Maybe it's just the waterfall playing tricks on your ears." "Yeah, maybe," was all he said. But I could tell he was upset about it. Throughout the following conversation, I noticed him perk up a few times as if he was hearing something, but I didn't ask him about it again. Finally, we both got tired and decided it was time to go to sleep. We crawled into our hammocks. I slipped up my mosquito net and fell fast asleep, and then suddenly I was wide awake. The sound of crunching leaves shot adrenaline through my veins. I swiped the cobwebs from my eyes in an instant, which would have been helpful if it was not pitch black around me. Strange. I could have sworn that the full moon that was out earlier should be giving off at least a little light. What if it's an animal, a wolf, or a bear? Or what if it's a person? It's not a ranger. It would have used a flashlight. His thoughts flew through my head at breakneck speed, and then they were interrupted by another crunch of leaves and twigs, this time a few feet closer. I quietly unzipped my mosquito net and reached for a glass bottle I had left on the ground earlier, just in case. I didn't have a plan until I heard Andrew's voice. All he said was my name. I froze when he did. Clearly he heard the crunching too, and thought I was the one causing it. Whatever it was, I knew he was there now. I had to protect him and also myself. I had to knock it out. I heard his voice call my name again. "Where are you?" And then it clicked. Andrew was the one walking around, looking for me, still on high alert from the adrenaline. I called back in a low voice. "Hey, I'm right here." He broke down. "I'm sorry, man. I've been lying awake this whole time, freezing cold and terrified out of my mind. We need to get out of here." As soon as I heard those words, my queasiness came back. But it was more than that now. I was terrified, Something was upstream from us. I could feel it there, watching us. I turned and whispered, "Pack up everything as quick as you can. No light, no sound. Let's get out of here." Everything was unceremoniously stuffed into our packs, and less than a minute later we were on our way back down the river, scrambling across cold, slippery boulders with a dying flashlight as our only source of light. I knew that if I turned around, something would be there, so I forced myself to only look ahead, but we made it around the bend to where the river met the trail. I fell away with cold fear come over me. I could feel ice watching us. In a fit of panic, I ran and climbed back onto the trail, forgetting about Andrew for a moment. I raced back to the gravel ditch on the side of the road where we parked at. I froze. Something bumped into me from behind, bringing me back to reality. It was Andrew, and he hadn't noticed it yet. There was a car parked next to mine. Nothing special about it, except that I hadn't been there at midnight when we had last been there. I turned off the light and put a hand over my mouth, showing him to be quiet. In the silent darkness, we ran to my car, threw our gear in, and tore out of the parking area. Only once we had rounded the first corner did I remember something. The gas tank was empty, knowing that the car could die at any moment. I let off the gas pedal and coasted as much as possible on the narrow mountain road this translates to. We flew down the mountain at a dangerous pace. Out of nowhere, something appeared in the road in front of us, floating about 10 feet off the ground. We both screamed, and I nearly swerved off the mountain to avoid it. We looked at one another, and then Andrew asked, "Was that a fucking balloon?" I thought for a moment, and yeah, it was. It was the most terrifying baby blue balloon that I've seen in my whole life. We then began to calm down, laughing at how we just scared ourselves over a balloon. But when a wolf ran across the road in front of us, that got us to shut up. No one wants to be miles out in the middle of nowhere, about to run out of gas, running away from something in the woods, especially with wolves outside the car, so we just drove the rest of the way in silence. Finally, we made it back to Gafflenburg. The flickering lights of the gas station were so beautiful in that moment. They almost shouted, "You're not going to die tonight." Trying to take off the edge from the night, we drove around until we reached the end of the road, which turned into a tunnel of darkness framed by tall trees. We turned around and drove all the way back home. By this time, it was around 6.3 inches the morning. And what sounds good at 6.3, Waffle House. We ate some cheesy eggs. I looked up and saw the sunrise. It was so beautiful that I nearly started crying right there. We had made it. I lived to see another day. We decided to go back to my house and just sleep. Later that day, we woke up, said our goodbyes, and went on with our summer. We have told this story to many of our friends and family members, and they have always enjoyed it, but they have never understood. Something happened that night. I have slept with the lights on since then, for more than one time. Sometimes I don't even sleep at all, when that overwhelming fear settles back in on me like a blanket. We didn't see anything and we weren't attacked, but I know something was there, and that's more terrifying to me. Something that we couldn't see. I could feel it though. I know it was watching us that night. Sorry if my story didn't meet expectations. This is actually a true story about me and my friend. I don't go camping alone in places I shouldn't. For anyone curious about the place, look it up on Google Maps and then follow RT 441 South until the road makes a squiggly shape. Keep zooming in, and you should see a white line that says Chimneys Picnic Area Comfort Station. Between that white line and the loop the road makes to the east is the trailhead for the chimney tops. I did end up asking Andrew a few things, especially about the voice. Couldn't tell me what it was saying, and he couldn't even be sure he was hearing a voice. What he said was that he thought he kept hearing the girl's voice. It sounded kind of distant, but also near, so he couldn't tell where it was coming from. I have no idea what it means or how to explain it differently, and he couldn't tell me what it was saying. I didn't hear anything that night, but I was terrified. If I had started hearing a voice, I would have most likely pissed myself. Also keep in mind that he laid wide awake in a hammock as I was sleeping for about 3 to 4 hours. Even if nothing was happening during that time, he could have just easily psyched himself out by remembering the voice earlier in the night and the fact that I told him that I could feel something watching us. Either way, he said he was cold and terrified and he wanted to go. That was enough for me. I am going to ask him about it now, though. I'm sort of curious if anything else happened. Also, I have a very reliable friend, a middle-aged professor, who heard this story and told me that during that time of the summer, The Smokies are one of the biggest places in North America for witches to travel to. That's something that I didn't want to hear. At the request of my friends, here is my own personal scary story. I woke up slowly, rubbing my eyes. I was sleepy. I was mumbling. I was trying to say, "Where are we?" My father looked back at me. "Kayla, you're going to miss the trip if you keep sleeping." I patted and looked out the window. I couldn't really sleep last night. You were snoring too loud. Outside the car, I could see where we were, in the deep valley of the mountains, evergreens towering above us, with a fine fog covering everything. After rounding the turn, the lake appeared before us. We were all amazed as we began to pull into the trail. We were going to go camping, a shiver. The landscape was beautiful, but at the same time, it scared me. Last night, I had night terrors. Actually, ever since I turned 4, I've been having these night terrors. I could never remember anything from them, just the color white. A voice that was speaking to me and running and more running from something. But I pushed the thought aside and I stepped out of the car. "Let's hurry up, guys, before the rain gets us." And by guys, my father was talking about myself, my 2 sisters, and my mother, 5 of us. Like a single unit, we set up camp quickly, and then resting in the tent, a downpour came down. I was disappointed. I wanted to explore, and I was fearing nighttime. I assured myself that this wasn't like home where I was in a room by myself. I was with everyone. The rain fell, and my father grew worried. "Hey, Keith," my mother said, an edge of fear in her voice. "Maybe we'll go somewhere else next time." My dad nodded, and he said we would find something much more drier. We were the only family, heck, the only people out here on this lake. When the night fell, we went to sleep early in the hopes of a new campsite. I was pouting again. I liked the place. I always loved the gloomy, cloudy, rainy weather. Then again, I'm not like my parents. With that in mind, I tried going back to sleep. And the rest? Can't remember what happened after this. You see, 10 years after this trip, my father told me what happened that rainy night. This whole discussion came along one day when we were telling scary stories with my family. I was now 17. We were having a great time, scaring one another. Until my father asked me in a serious tone if I remembered that one camping trip in the mountains. I told him, no. Which one? He told me how that night he woke up to a small scratching sound, but he dismissed it as an animal. He was a woodsman. He hunted. He knew these things. And if he had to, he wasn't afraid to load his rifle to protect us, except that night was different. Again, he asked me if I remember. I shook my head, interested in the story already. My dad didn't continue. He had woken up again, around midnight, to the sound of rustling. Like somebody was struggling. He looked around the tent. His wife was sleeping, along with Kelly and Kim. Kayla, however, I was making my way out of my bag, my long hair obscuring my face. Apparently a sleepwalk a lot, often going so far as to walk downstairs and go outside in the middle of the night, my dad said. It was a troublesome thing, but it wasn't something to get upset about. "Kayla," my dad whispered. I stopped moving. My dad then sighed. "Go back to sleep." Apparently, I listened as I leaned back into my sleeping bag. Satisfied, my father did as well. At 3 a.m, a sound alerts my father. He wakes up with a horrible feeling. He looks around again. Everyone is safe in their sleeping bags, except for me. He gets up, tying his boots on, noticing that my shoes are still by my bag. The zipper door to the tent is slightly open. My dad swears again and goes quickly to my mother. "Don, don't wake up the girls, but Kayla's missing." My mother got up, terrified. It's in that moment that my father said that the 2 of them decided that they would go through hell and back to give me if that's what it took. I am the middle daughter, but some confuse me as the youngest, as the palest, thinnest, weakest of the 3 girls. I'm often scared, worried, or even anxious. I have nightmares that wake the family up with my screaming, howling. No wonder my parents were so worried, even as the main character, a dull Kayla survival. I never knew about this. Suddenly, my dad told me that the zip-up door was opening slowly. Mom and Dad turned around and saw me. It was still raining. Outside was pitch black and I was illuminated by a quivering flashlight. Despite the downpour, I was dry, except for my feet, which were only a bit dirty. Ignoring the 2, I made my way to the bed. Head drooping, eyes semi-open. My mother and father were paralyzed, until my father broke his stance and rushed to me. He grabbed me by the shoulders and looked into my face. "Kayla." I blinked and looked up, emotionless. "Yes, Dad?" He gulped and spoke slowly. "Where have you been?" I went to the restroom. My father, relieved, he patted me and hugged me, but then he stopped. Before we went to sleep and before the rain came down, he had tried to find the restroom, aka the outhouse. Even he hasn't experienced woodsman, got lost. It was a confusing trail, and it would have taken somebody much older than me to navigate it, not to mention my glasses were gone. It was pure darkness, and I was only 7 years old. Lost in the moment, he ended up asking how, and I had said, according to him, and my father swears by this, and my mom, that I was like someone took me there. To this day I have no memory of that night. I only remember the second campsite and the way home. Everything else is blank, but for some reason I'm not afraid. At least I came back, and for some reason all the night terrors stopped. I wasn't scared anymore. So what do you guys think? Who, or possibly what, led me through the woods to the restroom on that rainy night? I have read so many stories and cases of people and all the strange things they experience in the woods, hiking, or even getting lost. This happened to me last year during the hunting season. Up on the Leech Lake grass, my father, my son, and my daughter, we were all going to go hunting in some area that we really hunted before. Now I do want to say that I've been hunting in these woods for over 15 years, and I had never gone over there. We just wanted to go try a different area. As we were getting out of the truck, we heard this loud, eerie sound call from the left side of the road, almost right next to us. A few seconds later, we heard a similar call from further down the road. It sounded like they were calling back and forth. It happened twice. I'm not sure what it was, but it did sound pretty scary. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded like it had some sort of effect to it. It did scare my kids, and they asked if they could just stay in the truck. My dad volunteered to stay behind and told me to go pull stuff and wait until it was in legal shooting light anymore. He actually didn't mind staying here with the kids. Now, I won't lie, I had never heard sounds like these before, so I was a bit creeped out. But again, I've been hunting since I could fire at 22. I've never been afraid in the woods before, and I spent days out of time out there by myself. And I have heard all sorts of unexplained sounds out here, to the point where you just get used to it. I then walked about 200 yards off the trail, and then another 300 yards off the trail, and I sat up against a big cedar tree. Now, where I was sitting at, I know the truck was behind me and to the right. I could also see about 150 yards in front of me and to the sides as I was sitting on the edge of the cedar swamp. Up here in North Minnesota, we have big cedars, but for the most part, there's not a lot of brush to block sight lines. I had to walk down a bit of an incline, and then I just sat there for a while, when suddenly, all I could hear was what sounded like snowmobiles, but not like they were moving away or coming to me, just that buzzing sound. You know how sometimes you hear a loud ringing in your ear and everything else will fade for a few seconds? It was something like that, but mixed in with the sounds of a snowmobile. About 5 minutes went by and the sound hadn't stopped, so I ended up messaging my dad and asking, "What the hell are those people doing out there? Is there more people parking or just arriving or what?" I assumed they were out there by where we parked the truck, so why are they just sitting up there? And then I got a reply back. "What people?" I responded with the snowmobiles. "I can hear them." My dad then responds with, "I'm sitting here. I can see about half a mile on the trail and there's no one up here." It did creep me out a bit. I don't know why, it just did. So I just looked around, and a few seconds later, the sound stopped. It went quiet. Like, not even normal quiet. Dead silence. It's almost like everything had turned off. And at this point now, I start feeling uncomfortable. I started to hear my own breathing, and I even told myself, "Calm the fuck down." The direction of the truck the way that I had came from. I started to hear voices, whispers. I thought maybe it was my dad helping one of my kids to get out to go pee or something. Then they got louder, and I knew it was getting close to being the time that the earth started using the trails in the swamp, so I ended up messaging my dad again, asking him to keep their voices down. He said they weren't even talking. He said they've been sitting inside the truck with the windows up because the kids got cold. I did ask if they just got back in, and he answered, "No, haven't gotten out since we got back in." Now I'm freaked out, but since I only had about 1 hour of shooting light left, I decided I was just going to deal with it. A few minutes went by, just silence, which for those of you who sat out here in the middle of nowhere, out in the woods, y'all know how unnerving that is. And suddenly, I hear a male voice and a female voice coming from my right. I tell myself it's my dad and my daughter talking. I press my back against the tree and wait again, then hear the same voices. Now I hear them on the left side. I shake it off, and I tell myself that it's just an echo. It has to be my dad and daughter, but then I start to hear the voices coming from behind me. Then they split up. I hear the voice of the guy to my left. I hear the voice of the guy to my right, and the female voice coming from right in front of me. Now I'm kind of frozen in fear. I'm in the middle of nowhere. The only trail is the one that I came in on. The voices are bouncing around. I can't see anyone. I'm standing now. I make sure that my gun is secure because at this point I'm about ready to run. Suddenly, I hear my dad say, "Hey," and I feel him put his hand on the side of my shoulder. I do get scared that I end up jumping. I turn to look and no one's there. I do get scared that I end up jumping. I turn to look and nobody is there. At this point, I grab my phone and call him. He answered and said, "You need help?" I asked if he had called me. He sounded confused and said he didn't. I'm like, all right, fuck this. I'm coming out. I'm done. I hung up and the noises started again. I ran so fast through knee-deep snow that I almost passed out from lack of oxygen by the time that I got to the trail. My dad was putting up to me. He jumped out all concerned after seeing me come out running, knees to chest. I yelled out that I'm fucking done. Let's go right now. And I ended up putting some tobacco down and left. I thought I was done with it. I dropped my dad off and drove an hour home. I ended up not sleeping until I smudged the house. That night, maybe it was in my head, but I swear I kept hearing noises, knockings, whispers, coming from somewhere. Who knows? I haven't been back to a spot since, and the first time that I do, all this happens. I guess maybe we weren't supposed to go hunting over there. Maybe I, ended up disturbing something in those fields, in those lands. My mother is a very social person out here, so she's always introducing me to people. When I first moved out here last year, didn't really make those connections right away. I had been on and off around here growing up, and even once I became an adult, I never really paid attention to how everything was connected. I guess it all started when I decided that I needed a fresh start. I moved out from the city, I was pregnant, exhausted, and I just needed money. I was looking for something I could do from home, or at least something simple, just to get a little extra cash coming in. That's when my mom told me that somebody from work knew somebody who was looking for a caretaker for a property out somewhere. Basically, it was just someone who walked the land, keep an eye on things, and make sure everything was secure. It sounded pretty simple. It was only 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and honestly, I could have used the exercise at that point, so I told her I was interested. My mom told me she would let her coworker know. A few days later, she gave me a piece of paper that had a phone number. I'm sure it came from one of those flyers that get posted in places where people rip off the tabs, the little pieces of paper with phone numbers on it. She told me, "I got the stuff for you, now you gotta do the work." My mom was helping me become more responsible and do stuff on my own, which I didn't mind. So I made a phone call, and I told him that I was available to start right away, since I already needed the extra cash. And I wanted to make sure I got across to other applicants by saying that I was available to start right away. He told me he lived outside of town, and he could just paint me through that mode, which was fine with me. The only thing was, he said he needed to send some documents over first. I figured it was just going to be something basic like a W-2 or some other forms. But when I printed them out, I started reading through them, and there were a few things that stood out. It said they weren't responsible for any injuries, and that I wasn't allowed to bring anyone onto the property or show it to anyone. Pretty secretive. As I looked through all the documents, that's when I realized just how remote this place actually is. It came with the address and a wannabe blueprint of the property, more like a drawing or sketch. The property was located behind Skinwalker Ranch, or at least near it. It's most likely why, but at that time I didn't even know what that was. I had no idea Skinwalker Ranch was such a big deal or tied to anything strange. I didn't even know there were TV shows and articles about it. The homeowner told me that the previous renters had already moved out as everything was pretty simple. I agreed to start that first Monday night. Well, Not at night. There was no way I was going to be out there at night. I was pregnant, and if you're out there alone, you're just asking to be kidnapped. So I wanted to make sure to get there on time, look over the property, and then leave, which is what he wanted me to do. Like I said, it was a pretty simple job. So on the first Monday night, my mom actually drove me out there. She knew the area better than I. I was completely in the middle of nowhere. And honestly, I didn't even understand what reservations were at that point. I just knew that native people lived out there, but I hadn't really put everything together. I grew up in the city, so I was pretty much living in my own bubble. Once we got there, the process was simple. I just had to walk the property line, make sure that the gate was locked, and check that the house was secure. Doors, windows, nobody had gone in and out. Walk around the lambs of the tree line all the way to the back. It was pretty big too, by the way. I think it took like 20 to 30 minutes to walk around it. Maybe I'm just exaggerating since I was pregnant. And also he said that if I saw anybody to let him know, or to call the police, but to not engage with anybody that you don't know what people are capable of. I didn't even think that would be an issue considering how isolated the place was. The place was lonely. It was like a big rectangle plot of land. You would go through the gate, the home was in front, and then walk around the land. The pictures show the edge of the land, being where the tree line was at. However, I also noticed a small shed. It looked like a chicken coop that was in the back, almost where the property finished at. It was closed by the tree line, which was strange. I didn't see this on the blueprint. So I started walking the property while my mom stayed in the car, watching me from a distance. Everything was normal. There was the house. I walked around it, making sure that everything was closed and locked. By the time that I was halfway during my round, the sun was just starting to set. I knew I had to hurry back. It can get pretty dark out here, especially driving back to town, and this was the only time that I was available, since I had a different job during the day. The first few nights were easy. Everything seemed pretty normal, at least. At first, it wasn't until a few weeks into the job that things started getting a little weird. On one Monday, when I first stepped onto the property, I always made sure everything was secure. The house itself technically wasn't locked, but I required a code to get inside, and only the homeowner had that code, so there was no reason for me to go in. But anyways, on this day, when I got there, I realized that the home was open because the door was set when I cracked open. My first thought was, great, somebody broke in. But then I was like, wait, maybe the owner is in here. I knocked. I opened the door. I did say hello, but there was no response. I walked inside. Maybe it was my mistake, but I checked every room. Nothing. No one was there. So I just closed the door and I continued walking around, but that was the first time that something felt different. I'm not sure how to describe it, but it felt weird inside that house. The house was empty too, but I was still going to tell the owner, but here's the thing. My phone didn't get signal out there, so after I finished my lap around the whole land, I came back to my car and ended up sending him a text. He always said to text him as he couldn't really talk on the phone. By the way, did I mention that he was horrible at responding? I would send him a text and he wouldn't respond to the next day. Maybe he worked overnight and slept during the day, but the message I got back from him was, I figured that door lock wasn't really working. I checked the cameras and it seems like the wind just blew it open. Yeah, fucking right. My mom only came with me the first few times. After that, I was on my own. The next night, I just had this really bad feeling, like something wasn't right. Everything seemed normal, though. It was then until I walked past that old run-down chicken coop, or whatever it was, that I had passed plenty of times before. I hadn't really gotten close to it. For some reason, on this night, I did. And that's when I noticed a few things. Aside from the owner having cameras all around, I hadn't noticed the ones around the chicken coop. I can't remember if they were up or not. Maybe they were, but like I said, I hadn't gotten this close before. And just to be safe, I opened the door to make sure nobody was in there. But now that I think about it, what if there was somebody? What would I even do? I guess I just wasn't thinking right at that moment. When I opened it, there was a large orange barrel. There was something off about it. It was swollen, like it was about to pop. And it was the middle of summer, so whatever he had inside must have been sitting in the heat for a while. There was some sort of lid on it, and a tarp on top of it as well. Something about it felt weird. I mean, I couldn't smell anything. So I just stood there thinking like, I'll let somebody else deal with that. The next night, I might loop around the property, just like I had been doing every time that I came out there. Everything felt normal at first, but just as I walked around, something caught my attention. The bathroom window was open. I call it the bathroom window because the window was up high. Privacy reasons, I guess. I'll stop to look at it for a second. I knew for a fact it wasn't like that before. I had checked everything the last time that I was there, and I would have noticed if the window had been open. I walked up closer and looked again just in case somebody was actually inside. I tried the door handle next and it was locked. That made it even worse. If someone had gone in through the window, how did they even get through the locked gate? Maybe they went through the sides or walked behind the property. But none of it made sense. But I was still trying to think of a logical explanation. I grabbed a loose brick from the foundation and stood up on it, trying to get a better look inside. Even then, I couldn't really get my head high enough to see anything. I was just standing there, straining to look in, hoping to see somebody or something. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound, nothing I could actually see. And that's when I came to my senses. I'm pregnant. And even if I wasn't, there's no way somebody could have climbed in through that window. It was way too high. You would actually need a ladder to get to it. There was no way somebody just ended up bringing a whole ladder just to get inside. Something wasn't right. I did get creeped out. I made a mental knoll right then and there, that as soon as I got service, I was going to call the police. I wasn't about to put myself in a dangerous situation, especially now while pregnant. As I walked back, I kept trying to connect the dots. I told myself maybe the wind blew the window open, just like with the door. Guess. I kept running through every possible explanation I could come up with, but no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, something about it just didn't feel right. Even while walking around, I just kept staring at the window, expecting somebody to crawl out. I texted the owner as soon as I got service, letting him know that the window had been open and that something just fell off. He didn't respond that night. It wasn't until the next day that he finally got back to me, saying that it was most likely just the wind that blew it open. Yeah, fucking right. Monday and Wednesday nothing happened. But the following Friday is when I really started thinking about leaving this job. Right when I got there, I noticed that there were shell casings everywhere. I mean, everywhere. The sun hadn't even set yet, so I could see them all across the property. It looked like somebody had been shooting non-stop out there. I notated this just to let the owner know, but as I started walking, that's when the smell hit me all at once. It was awful, rotten, like something had been dead out there for a long time. But there are no animals, nothing, just the land. But the smell was pretty strong and it would come and go. I tried to follow it, not the smell, but trying to figure out where it was coming from, in case there was some dead animal on the property. This way could tell the owner, but I couldn't find anything. But I wasn't going to stay there and look through every single yard. It wasn't coming from one specific place. It was just everywhere. I remember stopping for a moment and putting my hand on my stomach, apologizing to my baby. I told him that we were not going to come back out here again after this. I kept walking, trying to finish as quickly as I could. I made it all the way to the back, to the chicken coop shed. I turned back around and went the opposite way. When I did, I think I was about halfway there, when suddenly the door to the shed swung open. Not slowly, it slammed open. I turned around right away, expecting somebody to come out of it. I figured that maybe an animal was inside, but nobody came out. Maybe it was the wind. Now this is going to sound weird. That's when everything started to feel wrong. Not sure how to describe it. It felt like I wasn't ready there, almost like I had slipped into some kind of dream state. Everything felt slightly off, like I was floating. I told myself maybe it was pregnancy sickness or maybe I was stressing, but it's not how I felt. At that point, I didn't care what it was. I started speed walking back to my car. I got in and drove off. That was the last time I ever did my rounds this late. It was just too much, the smell and everything else. When I got home, I texted the owner and I told him everything. I did leave out the weird stuff, how I felt, but I told him that it smelled horrible, and he said he would get somebody to go clean. That maybe there was a dead animal by the trees and maybe the wind was causing the smell to come all the way to the land. It made sense. It was an open field. He did apologize and said that he would get it taken care of. He even told me not to come the next few days, until the following Wednesday. I needed the money. My own health was more important when I went out there on Wednesday. It wasn't dark, but I knew by the time that I finished making my round, it would be sort of dark. so I decided to do this pretty quick. Everything was normal. But right when I got by the shed, the smell hit me again. Great, here we go again. But then the smell went away. Maybe something died again further out and the smell was being brought when the wind was blowing. That's when I noticed something different. It was a big pit, like a pit where you burn stuff. It was filled with a bunch of random things. Diapers, oil, car parts, clothes, sticks, and a whole bunch of other things. I thought that maybe that's where the smell was coming from. Maybe something bad had been dumped there. Obviously somebody had used this as a dumping ground, and maybe somebody left something there that wasn't supposed to mix. But as I looked at it from up close, there was no smell. So I just kept walking the property line, and then I started walking back to my car. As I was walking back, that's when I started noticing things. Little bags, like those small, colorful Ziploc bags, the very tiny ones. They were all over the ground. I remember my mom told me that these little bags were used for drugs, so if I ever came across some of these, to leave them alone. So I did. I didn't touch anything. I just kept walking. But then the smell came again, stronger than ever this time, to the point where I ended up puking. Now mind you, being pregnant, my sense of smell was insane. I could pick up anything, and whatever this was, it was strong, and it was coming from somewhere around here. As I continued walking back, that's when I found my source of smell. You might not believe me, but there were like 3 golds, each one in a different state of decomposition. They were dead, obviously. Well, that was enough for me. I skipped the rest of the property line and went straight back to my car. How the fuck did they get in here? Didn't make sense. The property was gated, and when I say gated, it had some makeshift wooden planks all around in order to keep animals out. The only way inside was through the front gate, and I knew I locked that up every time that I left. Nothing was adding up. At that point I was already freaked out. I decided at that moment this was my last day there. The smell alone was enough to make me want to quit. When I got to my car, that's when I saw them. I could see the silhouette of somebody standing about 50 yards away, not in the property, outside, but I could see them from where I parked my car. This person was just standing there looking at the home. Not dealing with this shit. I drove away, never coming back here again. I texted the owner and told him there was people on the property. I told him about the smell and also the dead goats. I even told him it was my last day just to avoid anything. But I did ask him if he wanted me to call the police. Again, I didn't hear anything back right away, so I just left it at that. Later that night, he finally responded, and what he said didn't make any sense. He told me he had checked the cameras and that there was nobody there. According to him, I was the only person on the property the whole time. Didn't sit right with me. I know what I saw. The camera should have picked them up, but he kept insisting there was nobody there. He didn't say anything about the smell or the dead goats. He told me that the only thing the camera showed was me. At that point, I wasn't sure what to think. Part of me tried to rationalize it by telling myself that maybe it has something to do with my pregnancy. Maybe I was overwhelmed or imagining things. Deep down, I knew that was the net. I told him that I couldn't do it anymore. The smell, the creepy feelings, just everything going on. About a week or 2 later, he contacted me again asking if I could do him a favor and that he would pay me double. He said if I could show somebody the property that was going to lease it since I was familiar with it. He also said that he hired a cleaning company that went out there and took care of everything. He explained that somebody must have broken in and maybe people were drinking, partying, and they are the ones who created all the mess that there was. I wasn't too sure about going back, but I agreed. I figured it would be quick, and I was going to be during the daytime too. So the next day, I went back out there, and I brought my mom with me. Everything was normal. We walked through the home, which I had only done it once. We walked around the property. He was looking everywhere and asking questions. Then, he suddenly stopped and asked, "What the hell is that smell?" I couldn't smell anything. But I did tell him about the goats, that maybe if you died out there, I figured that's maybe what he was smelling. My mom also couldn't smell anything, so we just kept walking. We looked around the property past the home and soon we got to the chicken coop. He went to go look inside, and that's when he saw the same orange container that I had seen a while back. When he opened the door, I told him that I hadn't opened it because I was just here to make sure everything was safe. Now I do want to say that the barrel looked even worse than before. It was more swollen, like it was going to pop any moment. I did tell you that I had to tarp over it with some bungee cords holding it. He started to unhook them. I had a bad feeling about it. It took him a minute, but he was able to open it, and when he did, I kid you not, he screamed. He didn't say anything. He turned around and started walking back to his car. Me and my mom were both in shock because we didn't say anything. He just looked at us and said, "You are fucking crazy. I'm going to call the police." Me and my mom looked at one another, lost. I joked it off saying that maybe he saw some sort of spider or something, but then my mom went to go look herself, and the second that she saw inside, she threw up organs rotting, decomposing, all packed inside the barrel, filled all the way to the top. That was the final straw. We left the property just like the guy did. On our way back, my mom ended up calling the police. Who knows what time they ended up going out there. And whatever was inside that barrel, I didn't look inside, but I do believe my mom. When we got back home, I texted the homeowner and I told him what happened. After that, he told me not to come back to the property and he told me to stay away. He said he wasn't sure what I was talking about, but he said he was going to contact the authorities. Never did hear anything after that. I never went back out there again. I'm still not sure what was actually going on out there. And to be honest, did do some research on Skinwalker Ranch. It's not uncommon to come across dead animals out there. I also found out that when animals are found dead like that, it means that something is going on. A few months later, I started looking into things around that area. At first, I wasn't even trying to connect anything. I just couldn't get that place out of my head. I had questions, but the more I thought about it, the more things didn't make sense. So I started digging a little deeper into what people were saying about the land. Well, about Skinwalker Ranch. Like I said before, I didn't even know it was famous at that time. To me, it was just another job. But the more that I read, the worse it got. I started coming across stories, people talking about strange sightings, animals acting creepy, lights out in the distance, and then started hearing about ceremonies and rituals being done out there. Maybe there was something going on out there like that in the land that I was walking around. Didn't make sense. The homeowner acting weird, the dead goats, the smells, the fire pit. How come that wasn't smelling? And what about the home? The door being open, and even the bathroom window? I do think about that every now and then. It is what it is. Never went back there again. I even ended up blocking the dude's number. And maybe about a year later, me, my mom, and my son ended up moving back to the city. I guess something's in life. You're just not meant to understand. Maybe that's for a reason. I don't think it was a skinwalker that I came across, which is a person who practices bad medicine, or maybe it was. I'll let you decide after I tell you about my encounter. So my mom used to tell me that mirrors are not just for fixing your hair, they are actually windows. She told us growing up that they don't just show your reflection, they can trap things, reveal the truth, or even reflect things that don't belong in this world. That's why growing up, my mom only let us use the mirror when we would have to brush our hair or get ready. Then again, when have you ever known someone to use mirrors for something else, aside from those things? However, she always covered the mirrors at night, especially during ceremonies or when someone passed away. You know how when you leave or go out, you make sure your doors are locked or you make sure you have your wallet, your keys and stuff. Add covering mirrors in the house before we left on that list, especially when we would have ceremonies. I never quite understood what she meant, not until that day at the powwow. Not until I saw something I wasn't supposed to see, I think. For those who might not know, a powwow is more than just a gathering. It's the celebration of our culture, the songs and the dances. Families come together, dancers wear regalia, you hear the drums, and our languages and traditions are kept alive. There are ceremonies, honor, and sometimes competition. But above everything else, it's where we all come together. Growing up very traditional came with knowing how to powwow dance. Well, learning. I went to powwow club and I made a lot of friends that I still know today. As a kid, I was always shy and reserved, but I was always around watching and listening. Many of the people that were there at the club were younger back then, and today when I go there's only elders and grandparents. But that's all right. I have always loved dancing, and as I grew up, it was always the same crowds in surrounding areas, and even at the reserve powwows. As I grew older, I was always happy to see everyone in every season, new regalia and new dances. Now, there was always this one dancer who stayed in the same outfit for many years, and he was well known in the community. He was a very proud dancer as well. One day, at a weekend-long powwow, I was with my family and my son, who was smart at that time. I was getting ready and I had a mirror on me to fix my plumes and get my hair sprayed and everything else. I was looking in the mirror on the hood of the car, and I was trying to hurry as the grand entry was starting soon, and guess who I see? This long-time dancer there getting ready as well in the corner of the mirror. I could see him putting his stuff on and attaching strings to keep his stuff up, and I started thinking to myself, oh, he's rushing too, just like me. His back was facing me, but from the outfit I knew it was him. Then he turned around to his side, and I was still looking at myself in the mirror. However, when he did, what I saw shocked me to the core of my soul. Now I want to paint you the scene. It's daylight. There's people everywhere, laughing and socializing, and we could all hear the person saying that dancers needed to make their way to the harbor. But this dancer, as he turned, and I'm not sure how to describe it, but I will never forget that image. His head, his face, it wasn't human. There was no long gray hair, which he always had. There was no glasses on his face, and no wrinkled brown skin. There was nothing. There was only a skull, and it had flesh spots on it. It looked like a skull that was decomposing. I got goosebumps, and my son was sitting beside me, sitting on a chair, drinking from a sippy cup. I grabbed him and our stuff. This time I physically turned around and looked at the man again, and he looked normal. I didn't know what to do. I just panicked and went to sit with my family, and I didn't say anything. I kept my son close to me all day, and when I danced my category, I made sure my mom was holding him. Throughout the whole day, I was just asking myself if I already saw that or if I was just imagining. When the evening came for grand entry again, I was in line to enter the harbor, and I was in front of another dancer who happened to have a mirror. It was on her back. As we entered the harbor, I noticed that the dancer I saw earlier was behind us, just a few yards away. So when we lined up and stopped for the honor song, I tried to look in the mirror of the dancer in front of me to see where this guy was. I saw him. He looked normal. As the rest of the day went on, I just avoided going around him. I did grow up learning that when we see stuff like this, that it's really not good. Now it's been a while since I've seen this dancer because I pulled away due to personal circumstances, but do believe that I was shown a really evil side of this person that no one will see in at this time because he was getting so much attention in the powwow community. I say this because of what happened down the road the next few years. I started to hear that he's losing a lot of respect. I actually talked with a friend and I started hearing things, little rumors here and there. Rumors that people no longer invite that dancer to their powwows. Some say they don't trust him anymore. Some say something's just off about him. And deep down, I knew it. I just knew it. I still go to some powwows, not always to dance, sometimes just to watch, support, and be there. But every now and then, he still shows up, still walks around. But something's different. His outfit has also changed. I'm not sure if he got into something dark. I believe he was either wrapped up in bad medicine or he's starting to walk that path. And honestly, I think when I saw his reflection, or whatever that was, maybe I was seeing the spirit inside of him starting to rot away. My son was around 2 when this happened. He's 11 now, so all of this happened in the span of 9 years. I'm not sure if anyone else has seen this at powwows or anywhere at traditional gatherings or ceremonies. I feel like sometimes when I think about it, no one would believe me. But what do you all think? Has anyone had any experiences like this? Or do you all have an idea of what I saw? This is my first time telling the story. I felt like I had to get it off my back. At least somebody could hear it. This happened 2 years ago, and my parents own a cabin in North Saskatchewan. And yeah, I'm actually in North Canada. I decided I wanted to spend some time by myself up there. My parents agreed because they wanted me out of their attic. I've been readying to the paranormal the past few months, so I found the idea of being by myself and isolated with whatever is out there in the North Forest pretty comforting. So I drive up there in late November. I stocked up on food to last a few months. I leave my phone at home since I only use it for internet-related stuff anyways. The cabin has electricity and satellite but no internet. But all my video games are offline anyways, so it doesn't really matter. I bring a hunting rifle with me as well, obviously for hunting. The cabin has a basic layout with an extension added on when my sister and I were born. It was done to add extra room for us on vacations up here. It's mostly made out of wood except for the thin roof that's on the extension. When I show up, I unpack all my stuff and I just sit there and chill. The cabin is really close to the tree line. This is because the cabin was actually built on a very small clearing. Others would find this claustrophobic. I find it relaxable when it came to stuff like this. The first night I chill and listen to the sounds of the animals as I fall asleep. No TV, just relaxing and easing into my new environment. That's when I hear what sounds like a deer or a moose out in the distance. Anyways, the first day I get out my winter clothes on and head into the woods. I stay close by the trees where the snow was easy to walk through. I'm reminded of all the times I walked through these woods as a kid with family. I decided to get out further, and I travel in parts I've never been before. Even when I was a kid, my parents would never tell us where we could and couldn't go. We just never got around it. I didn't hear that sound off in the distance, and I'm starting to think, maybe I can get up close and have a good look at it. Most of them are kinda dangerous up here since they're not familiar with people, but I figure I could climb a tree if it charges or something for some reason. I walk to where the noise was coming from, and the sound doesn't get any louder. I figure it must be walking away from me, but I also can't find any tracks. I decided that it's actually a lot further away than I thought it was, and I couldn't even chase after it if I wanted to. After only like 7 hours of daylight, I started to head back because I don't want to get caught out here in the darkness. It's not the kind of place you want to get lost in at any point. Once I get back home, I started to think about the whole thing. I do get a little bit creeped out, just the fact of being out here by myself. So I just cook dinner and go to bed. The next day, when I go outside for a walk, I find a rotting moose with all the skin on its head chewed off. I figure it was most likely maggots or other small animals picking away at it. At one point I try to go hunting for deer or anything else, but I could never find tracks despite all the calls I heard at night. Mostly female, for some reason. I always told myself that they must be a lot further out than I usually venture to. But one day, I went out and actually managed to snag a small buck, and I'm thinking, yeah, this is what I came out here for. I had never shot one by myself before, so I had no idea how to take care of the meat. I decided to leave it till tomorrow and butcher it when I woke up. I went full dumbass mode and left it hanging outside as to not stink up the cabin. The next day, I went out and there were huge bites taking out of it. I'm thinking, oh great, some animals are in here now. Some animal got to it first and mangled it to pieces. Whatever it was really went at it on the head for some reason. I couldn't pick out what animal would have made the bite marks, but I decided to stop walking out so far into the woods for now. I even start to wonder how I even got a male buck, if all the calls I heard were female. I know what the calls are, and these were more long, drawn out, indicating female. I started to get creeped out since I do get anxious about random stuff anyways, but I quickly made myself forget about it, since I dared promise myself that I would stay for the full few months and not go home early. The next night I couldn't sleep because of my anxious thoughts. You know how insomnia works and stuff. I began to hear a very slight noise. It was a very quiet night, so I would be able to hear something outside if anything was there, but I couldn't make out what it was. Eventually it got louder, as if the sound itself was frustrated. I realized something must be making it, so I sat up and listened to it, like something being scraped over the top of wood. The sound traveled all the way across the cabin past where I was sleeping and into the extension and all the way around again. The second time it passed the extension, it stopped right where I was sitting on the bed for just a moment, and then it continued. This went on for a few minutes, but eventually it stopped, and then I simply just passed out. The next day I had to convince myself that what happened was in a dream. I began to brainstorm an idea about some intelligent animal. This can't just be a coincidence, I thought. In the middle of the day, I built the courage to go outside and see what happened. There were scratches on snow-covered walls, not enough to wreck the wood, but enough to see a pattern of scratches that were made more than a few feet above the ground. This definitely wasn't just some dumb animal. I finally decided to take a look at my door. The scratches were serious on the wooden door, as if someone with a big fingernail spent hours scraping at it. I started tripping balls on fear at this point, whatever it was. It was smart enough to tell that the door was the way inside, but obviously predatory. I came to the conclusion that whatever this was must have been the same thing that mauled the bug that I had caught. Finally decided to look at the footprints. The best way to describe them was like bare footprints, but really long. I know for a fact that whatever this was definitely not a bear. That's when I began to realize something. There were no footprints around the cabin, just the ones leading up to it and leaving. This thing must have been climbing around my walls, dragging its nails to create the scratches. This was definitely not a bear. I just wanted to get out of there at this point, but the sun started to go down and storm clouds started moving in. I had been out there for just 2 hours just looking at all this stuff. I couldn't leave in a blizzard or in the dark, so I just locked myself in and went to bed with my gun. My mind started racing when night hit. The wind was blowing outside, but off in the distance I heard that same noise again. I began to put 2 and 2 together. Whatever this thing was, it was calling male animals by mimicking female mating calls. I know I prefer male animals since they have more meat. When I left that damn buck outside, it could tell that I was here. In fact, the first full day that I spent here when I was chasing that moose call, it could have been right above me in a tree or something. My train of thought was stopped when I heard that damn scratching noise again. I barely made it out because the blizzard was so loud, but I could still recognize it. Either it saw me as a rival or as prey. At this point, I'm not sure which was worse. I know this thing was good at climbing because I heard the sounds of feet on the wooden roof and very faintly on the snow. Suddenly, the sound changed to feet. It was right above me. I couldn't handle this anymore. But I know I couldn't leave because that's exactly what it wanted. The banging sounds on the thin roof went on for what felt like hours as the storm went on. Eventually it went away and I thought, thank God. The blizzard began to die down too. I could hear better now. But I was not ready for what happened next. That's when I heard a woman's voice outside, not making any words, just babbling. I thought, fuck, this barefoot demon thing. It's trying to trick me like you did all those moose and deer. The sound was very close, at least within the tree line. I ended up grabbing a big-ass flashlight and went to open one of the windows. I shined it outside towards where the sound was coming from. That's when I saw it. This ungodly 7-foot-tall, slim, muscular build. Theme. My eyes eventually adjusted to what I was looking at. The face was a hideous interpretation of a human, almost like if you described to an alien what a person looked like and then they fed the drawing to dogs. The nose was upturned like a bat, facing directly at me. Its eyes weren't sunken in like you would suspect. They were protruding out. The eyes looked almost swollen. Its mouth was round and way too big. The face was shaped like a baboon's face, very oval with a heavy brow ridge. But it was incredibly flat, and its forehead was big. It started moving its lips, almost like it was trying to talk, except all it looked like at this point seemed to be smiling at me. Its hands were a combination of sloth and human hands. In one of its hands, it held the head of a buck, while the skin had been chewed off of it. After getting a good look at it, I took a shot at it. I'm not sure if I hate it since I dropped the flashlight, but that's when I saw it drop the head and run off into the woods. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed to it, and I could barely make out a shape climbing a tree in seconds, and then jumping from one tree to another. Fuck you and this cabin. I ended up not sleeping the rest of the night, and I left in the morning. I came home early and told my parents I was feeling lonely as an excuse to come back. I never told them what happened because they would have assumed that I was taking drugs. Anyways, this is most likely the only time that I'll ever tell this story. I don't believe in magic or even in forest demons or anything like that. Not sure what I saw out there. I'm not going to give it a stupid name like all you other guys do when they see something like this. But I know one thing's for sure. I'm never going back to North Saskatchewan as long as I live. Have a story to share, but I am going to warn you. It contains some very uncomfortable details. It's a story that's been passed around a bunch of times. Maybe you heard it before, but I want to share it from the perspective of my mom. She said there was a little boy that lived with his grandparents in an area north of here. His grandfather would leave some nights saying that he would go to a family member's to play cards and to come back late in the night. The grandmother eventually got curious about these nights, especially because sometimes he wouldn't even come back till the next day. So she had the boy follow his grandfather just to see where he would go. Following his grandfather, they would pass the relative's home that he was supposedly playing cards in. Eventually they came to a canyon edge. The boy then saw his grandfather disappear down the canyon wall. Moving closer, he saw a very narrow path that would allow the person to walk down the canyon wall. Going down the path, he saw his grandfather taking his clothes off and leaving his clothes at the entrance. Creeping down, he came to a cave entrance that was covered by animal skins. Looking in, He saw his grandfather and his grandfather's family members, all naked, sitting around a fire, passing a bowl of some liquid around and watching two people. While doing that, he recognized one of them as his uncle, and the other being one of his own uncle's daughter. They ended up seeing him, and they dragged him in, and they placed him in some back room that looked to be used as storage. He saw some animal skins and bones with what looked to be the corpse of an infant. After a while, they had the boy join them, and they told him to undress and to quote-unquote do it with one of his family members that was there. The boy noticed that they seemed to be under the influence of what was in the bow, the one that they were passing around, and that they were also unsteady on their feet. That's when he chose that he was going to try to leave, and as he began to take his shirt off, just to deceive that he was going to stay and do as they asked. But when they let their guard down, he took off running as fast as he could. Some of them tried to follow him out, but they ended up falling down the canyon wall. Continuing to run, he eventually got back to his grandmother. Just before he approached the hogan, he saw a coyote wandering around the area. So he stopped and looked at it as it was digging a hole in the ground, and it dropped something in the hole and then it just covered it. Seeing the coyote leave, he ran into the hogan and told his grandmother everything that he saw. She listened to everything that he said, so they drove away to go to a medicine man the grandmother knew of. They ended up conducting some sort of ceremony and singing. Then the medicine man had the boy say the name of each person that he saw in the cave, and he also told the grandmother that the bundle the boy saw, the one that the coyote buried, it actually contained some of her hair and other personal things. Eventually, every person that the boy named ended up dying. My mom used to finish this story telling me to never get involved with bad medicine. The land remembers everything, and it has history. That's why the elders taught us, before you build, before you move in, before you enter someone's home, before you even step foot on certain grounds, you should always pray. You should always ask for permission. Sometimes there are things still there, spirits that never leave, not in the walls, but in the land itself. Here in the Pine Ridge Rest, there's a school called Pahing Centeo, Iowa, that was opened in 2008. If you live around here, you know about it, or you even heard stories about it. For those who are closer to my age, will know that the school was built to replace an older one. The older one was built back in late 60s, or early 70s, and you also heard stories about it. Shadow figures, a little girl, and also a bunch of other things. My dad was in actual security there in the late 80s, and he would tell me so many stories and encounters about this. He retired around the transition to the new school. It has kindergarten through 8th grade. It's a very new school, and you would think that it would not have anything wrong with it. Well, any bad history at that, or any bad energy. And whenever people would say this, I always remind them that the land it was built on was there way before the foundation was even built, even before the community of Porcupine existed. At first, nothing happened. All the stories of the dark shadows and things people had witnessed in the previous school didn't quote-unquote move with the school to the new facility. Even though the old school playground and gym were less than 300 yards south of the new school, all of that didn't last very long. This story is one that my friend told me. He ended up taking my dad's old spot after he retired. Well, actually after they had a hard time keeping anyone there. People kept quitting, and that's when he stepped in. Like how all things begin, it started small. Some of the teachers said that they would hear footsteps. Things would go missing and then reappear in some other classroom. Eventually the teacher stopped staying late, and they would leave as soon as they could. The women that would have to stay late or work longer hours would actually quit after a few weeks. Then security guards and janitors started doing the same. They would leave early or just quit. The HR manager was getting frustrated from having to hire janitors and different security guards every few months. The last security guard he hired before my friend told him why he was resigning. Keep in mind that my friend said that the HR manager was not a believer, as you will see. So when the security said why he was quitting, the HR manager just laughed about it. That's when he brought my friend on board, and he also brought a new janitor. He decided to be honest with them and told them why the previous people had quit. The new janitor didn't say anything, but my friend did tell him that such things do exist. However, he said it was most likely the building settling in its foundation. He said that he was a labor worker when it was being constructed, and that is what the engineers had said the building was going to do. For a few years after it was completed, they said even though the ground was compacted, The weight of the building was going to put pressure on the ground, and it would eventually settle completely. The HR manager agreed with him and said to let him know if there were any issues. So he started the job, and for 2 weeks nothing happened. But after that, Monday morning rolled around, and my friend went into the HR manager's office. You know, for the sake of this story, I will call my friend Donnie. Don't ask me why, but that's what I'm going to call him. So Donnie was asking him who all had keys to the building. The HR manager said, as far as he knew, the ones with keys were the principal, the janitor, some teachers whose classrooms were near the doors as they were designated as fire exit, and also himself. He ended up asking Donnie why. Donnie told him that over the weekend he was doing his checks when he saw a boy near the fire exit doors. He yelled out at him, but he took off running. Then he disappeared by the fire exit doors. So Donnie requested if he could remind the teachers near the doors to be sure that the doors were locked. Whenever they left on Friday, the HR manager said that he would remind them. And so Donnie got up to leave his office, not wanting to start an argument with the teachers about the doors. He asked if it was caught on the school cameras. Donnie then pulled out a little notebook from his pocket, and he gave him the time of when he saw the little boy. The HR manager told him that he would talk to the teachers and to the principal about it. Donnie said that the HR manager ended up talking with the principal, and he just shook his head. He said that before he puts a memo out to the teachers about what Donnie said, he wanted to see the security tape. They both ended up reviewing the security camera, and just like Donnie said, they could see that boy running around in the school. And as Donnie actually chased them, he disappeared by the exit doors. So a memo was put out to all the staff to make sure that the doors were locked and to double-check them before they went home. By now, Donnie knew that the message had been sent to everyone, so he figured this time there wouldn't be any more break-ins. Also, the story about the boy quickly circulated around the school, among the staff, and yes, even to the kids themselves. If you're a teacher at a school, then you know that nothing can stay hidden. So when Friday rolled around, all the teachers double-checked all the doors to make sure they were locked, and they all went home. The following Monday, Donnie told me that he was once again in the office, talking to the HR manager that the boy was back. He gave the time and location. This time he was in the lower level of the school running around. He lost him in the cafeteria, and he thought he ran into the gym and out the exit doors in the gym. This time, Donnie, the principal, and the HR manager review the security tape. Once again, they saw the boy running away, down the lower level hallway and towards the cafeteria, where he disappeared. Nothing else happened after that, but when that Friday came around, the principal and the HR manager and Donnie all personally checked all the doors, and they were all locked like they were supposed to. Satisfied that there was no way that the boy could come in, they went home for the weekend while Donnie stayed behind. Everybody was wrong. Donnie was waiting for them on Monday again. He said that the boy came back over the weekend. All three of them looked at the video as the boy ran around the upper level and eventually took off towards the north door, which was the front door of the school. On camera, you could see that Donnie was behind them about 15 yards as he made a turn towards the front door and then just disappeared. The principal and the HR manager were all confused as they had all checked the doors before they left. Things got busy that week, and everybody just put it to the side until Friday came along. When Donnie arrived, the principal and HR manager were still there. Basically, they told him that they need to find out who this kid is and that the HR manager was going to stay with him tonight and help Donnie out. My friend said this was perfect. 1, they could find out who this boy was, and 2, as my friend said, if it is a spirit, this would turn this non-believer into a believer. So the principal left, and only the HR manager and Donnie stayed behind. Once inside, the HR manager and Donnie went to the security office. They both got a two-way radio and settled in for the night. Donnie left on his first round of checks in the building, while the manager stayed at the cameras watching. As the night went on, every once in a while Donnie would make eye contact with the cameras as he made his way back to the office from the lower-level classrooms to the upper-level classrooms and the library. Everything was quiet until around 3 a.m. when Donnie went on his rounds. He started on the lower level and made his way to the upper when he got to the end of the hallway. That's when he got on the two-way radio. He said that the manager told him that he could see the little boy down in the lower level. He said that he must have just passed him, or maybe he was hiding in the last classroom as he walked by. Donnie turned around and went back downstairs right away. He got to the bottom and called the manager back on the two-way. He asked where he went. The manager said over the radio that he saw the little boy sneaking towards the restrooms at the end of the hall by the cafeteria. Donnie just shined his flashlight down the hall, and that's when he caught a glimpse of the boy looking at him around the corner of the boys' bathroom. Donnie yelled at him, and that's when he took off running down towards the bathroom, but before he could get there, he said he saw the shadow come out and headed towards the cafeteria and the gym. Also could hear feet running down towards the gym as he came around the bathroom. That's when he heard the gym doors open and close. Donnie kept running, and as he came into the gym, he could see the shadow go out the other gym door and back into the cafeteria. He ran towards the same door, but at this point, any footsteps had stopped. That's when he called the manager over the radio asking if he saw where the little boy went. The manager came back and said that the boy was running down the hallway. The manager came back and said that the little boy was actually running down the hallway he had just come from. Apparently, he was making a big circle. Before Donnie could say anything, he saw the boy peek out at the end of the hallway, so he took off running. On the cameras, the manager could see the little boy running away from Donnie, down the hallway towards the cafeteria, through the gym doors, and then coming back out the other side. Donnie could also be seen running down the hallway again. The manager then caught the little boy as he started running down the upper-level hallway, into the library and the front office. The manager saw Donnie as he came out into the upper-level hallway, so he stopped and called them on the radio, and that he could actually see him hiding at the end of the hallway. As he said that, Donnie saw the little boy peek around the corner at him. He yelled at him again and took off running as the boy took off towards the front door. As he came around the end of the hallway, he could see that no one was there as he looked towards the front door. So he stopped and called the manager over the radio, asking which way the boy ran. When he went out the door, the manager radioed back. He said the little boy was out front by the front door. Donnie looked towards the front door, but he didn't see anyone. So he called the manager again over the radio, asking him where is he at. The manager then said that he was right there at the front door, but he sounded scared over the radio. "Are you sure?" Donnie asked. The manager then said, "He's right there. Don't you see him? He's looking back at you through the glass." Donnie then said, "I don't see anybody." The manager then said, "He's right there. He's looking right at you. There's no one here, dude. What are you talking about?" Then, the radio went dead. Donnie shined his flashlight towards the front door, but there was nothing there. He tried calling the manager back, but there was no answer. So he shined his flashlight one last time, and so he made his way back into the security office. When he walked in, the manager was sitting there, staring at the monitor. He was pale white. "Dude, are you good?" Donnie asked. He shook his head yes, and pointed to the screen. Donnie was looking, but like when he was there was nothing on camera. It took a minute for the manager to compose himself. And after a few minutes of talking, "What the heck is going on?" the honey said that he wanted to see where the boy was right in front of him that he apparently just missed. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those surveillance security programs, but they're really glitchy, and it takes a while to get to the time frame that you wanted to get to. Regardless, they started to play back. And there, right in front of him, on video, was the little boy. He had his hands cupped to the glass of the front door. While he was looking at Donnie, he could see himself talking on the radio, looking towards the front door and then shining his flashlight towards it. The little boy kept his hands cupped alongside his face while he looked in. His flashlight made him lean back away from the window, but then he went back to looking back at him. As the video kept rolling, he could see himself walking away as the little boy came in and followed him down the hallway. Slowly, right behind them, they continued watching, silent, frozen, and then they switched to the camera inside the security office. The video showed the manager sitting exactly where he was now, with Donnie coming into the office, staring at the screens. But then, that's when they saw the boy walk in behind them. He stepped up beside them and just stared at them, and just as they were about to stop the video, something else moved on screen. A shape, a shadow. It appeared behind both of them. My friend Donnie didn't stay much longer after that night. He ended up quitting a few days later, and that's when he told me the story. But what about the HR manager? Well, he ended up transferring out not too long after because no matter how new the school is or how many times you paint the walls, some things never leave. Not if they belong to the land, and the land itself, it never forgets. In all seriousness, my friend Donnie wouldn't make any of this up. Like I said, you used to hear stories about the school before it was remodeled, but recently, there's been stories starting to come back up again. I dare you to ask anybody who's a teacher at Behanes and Dio, Iowa on the Pine Ridge Raz. My family has a hunting cabin in the National Forest of Pennsylvania. My grandpa, who worked in a steel mill in Pittsburgh, bought the land in the 70s whenever the agents used to go into the mills and post ads for huge plots of land that the steel workers would break up and all get their own plots for dirt cheap, then help each other build their own camps. Allegedly, there was a gravesite found on the property that my grandpa bought. The details aren't exactly known how this was discovered, but apparently some type of survey was done before the property was sold. An archaeologist from the University of Pittsburgh uncovered a very old Native American grave. They excavated the grave, but the pit, by that point now just the depression in the ground, was still there. This was on my grandpa's property about 200 yards from the cabin. Of course, I don't know if any of this is true, but the depression was, and as far as I know, is still there. And that was the story that we were all told. Of course, when I was a kid, my cousins and I used to do very dumb and stupid things, like go back to the site in the middle of the night, and we would dare each other to lay down on it. I must have been around 10 when this happened, back in the early 90s. My dad swears he doesn't remember it, but my cousin remembers it, as we still keep in touch. So we were sitting around the campfire, roasting hot dogs and marshmallows and talking, that type of stuff. Obviously, there was no alcohol on my part, as I was around 10 and my dad didn't drink. I remember my dad telling everybody to be quiet, and my older cousins and my dad were talking about seeing somebody in the woods. My dad then shines a flashlight into the woods. We don't see anybody. We go back to business, and one of my cousins actually shouts, "There he is again." By shielding the light from the fire, you can see a wispy, grayish human figure walking through the woods slowly, like he's not trying to make any noise. He was walking from our left, as if he came from behind a cabin and was crossing a wood line along our left and then across the front of the yard, just along the trees, about 50 yards or so from us, taking a wide turn to avoid us. Nobody said a word. My dad and one of my cousins both shine flashlights several times, but he would disappear. You could only see him in the dark, and after your eyes were adjusted, at some point he walked in the field of view where the fire was between us and him, and that was it. We never saw him again. One of the creepiest things out of all this is that he was walking towards the gravesite. We had never seen this before, and we never saw it again. I spent about a week every summer at the camp, until I was about 20. Family drama, weirdness. After my grandpa died, it kind of ruined the camp for us, and I haven't been back since then. Needless to say, we didn't mess with that grave, or any grave, again. After reading a few discussions on here, I decided I had one of the creepier, still unexplained events that happened to me and to a group of friends within the past 5 years. Thinking back on it, I still get this unnerved bad feeling that just sort of lingers. Anyways, here it goes. A group of friends and myself rented a place on a lake for just a fun-filled drunken weekend. We were all in our young to mid-20s, and it was supposed to be just big party. For the most part, that's what it was. The Friday night and Saturday morning, we pretty much went all out, having a blast on the water and just doing fun, stupid stuff. Well, naturally, when Saturday afternoon rolled around, we were all so dead from going all out that we decided it would be a night of no drinking, maybe a little weed smoking by some of us, and just kind of having a chill evening at night. That's what it was, relaxful. So 9 p.m. comes rolling around, and about 8 of us were inside the house and 5 of us were outside. The house was a 2-story with a 2nd-story deck back porch, and it was surrounded by the woods, and then down through the woods you would hit the lake. I'll mention that we had already experienced some weird things from the locals when we arrived in town. Mostly just backcountry old-timers that I assume were irritated because we were a bunch of college-age kids looking to have a good time. But the town and the lake are big, so it's not like anyone knew where we were staying at. Anyways, 3 of my friends were on the upstairs back porch, and my other friend and I were downstairs outside just talking on this little old table near the woods. I mean, it was otherwise just a really nice night. My friend and I were just getting lost in the conversation, and all of a sudden there was this weird feeling, like an unnerving experience that came from the woods behind us. It was so strong that we both kind of quiet down, and then, out of nowhere, there was this loud chanting coming from deep within the woods. I have no idea how far away it was because of the way the lake is set up. I'm pretty sure the voices were carried up through the forest. It was so strong we both kind of quiet down. And then, out of nowhere, there were these loud voices coming from the woods. It sounded like some kind of secret cult, just chanting away, and all of the voices were male. I mean, they were loud and perfectly in sync. I think we were frozen for all about 20 seconds before I couldn't contain myself and ran towards the house with my friend following me. I don't know how to explain the feeling that came with that chanting, but it felt very evil, like something so uninviting. I was shaking by the time we got up to the second story and ran out on the balcony with the other 3 friends, one of them who was my brother. By the time we got up there, the chanting was gone, and I naturally asked, "Did you guys hear that?" They had also heard the voices, and not seconds later, it began again. So the 5 of us are out there peering into the forest, listening to this chanting that would sometimes sound far away and then sound very close. They were all male voices in the weirdest language, and I don't even know what it was. It sounded almost like a strange extreme church. Then, following the chanting, a loud bang like someone hit a huge metal object sounded, and then the worst part came. A man, screaming, in extreme pain, crying and screaming. All of my hair was up at this point. It was the scariest thing ever. My brother and I were staring at each other. The screaming stopped, and then it was back to the chanting, which eventually died out. I was so freaked out by it that I wanted to call the police because it sounded like whoever screamed was in a lot of pain. That mixed with the weird chanting just made me immediately think of some terrible sacrifice going on. One friend tried to say that it must have been some drunk guys just messing around, singing and being weird. But there is no way that was coming from some drunk guys. They were perfectly in sync, and then the loud screaming of pain. I didn't call the cops, and I wish I would have, but to be honest, the forest is so big, and since the lake house was up looking down at the woods and lake, it could have been anywhere. It definitely wasn't close to us, but it was close enough to hear all of that perfectly. We went in and got some of the others, but by the time they came out, everything had stopped. Someone actually wanted to go explore and find where it had been coming from, but obviously that was a stupid idea. After that, I was so ready to go home. I can't explain the relief of driving away from there the next morning. Even now, I just get the worst feeling that whatever it was, it felt so wrong and evil. I'll never forget that moment. I can only imagine it was some sort of secret cult that possibly sacrifices humans. I never really knew my grandma's brother well. All I can remember is that he was a real energetic man who lived on the hill where my grandparents resided in the Navajo res not far from the Chaco Wash. My grandma's brother used to reside a couple of miles north of my grandparents' place. His dwelling, more like a shack, sat on the outskirts of the Badlands. When we were young, we were instructed to steer clear of this place because it was considered evil. I never questioned why. I just accepted the warning and avoided the area. As time went by, my grandma's brother passed away under strange circumstances. He was found dead in his house. Even though he would occasionally visit my grandparents, his absence for a few days was unusual. My older uncle went to his house and discovered his lifeless body. What was strange was the hasty funeral arrangements that followed. Normally, in Navajo tradition, funerals are held on the 4th day after the person's passing, but in this case, the funeral was conducted immediately without even informing the family. Curiosity led me to sneak over to his house to see what it looked like inside before it was torn down as per my grandmother's request. The inside of the house felt eerie. It was a one-room, shed-like structure with faded and sun-bleached wooden boards for walls. The boards didn't fit tightly, allowing sunlight to filter in, illuminating the floating dust particles. The bed was modest, adorned with a green army blanket. There weren't that many decorations, mostly old shearing tools and knives, with no photographs in sight. An old wood stove and a small table occupied the space, alongside 2 crates at the far end of the room, one wooden crate laid open, revealing its contents, while the other, made of metal, was locked. After my brief exploration, I left the house, knowing its vantage point, overlooking the Badlands to the west. Several years passed, and my older uncle decided to build his dream house on the exact site where my grandmother's brother had lived. Despite my grandmother's concerns about the location, my uncle was determined to proceed with the construction. He envisioned a single-story ranch-style house, equipped with all modern stuff, which was actually very rare on the res. The construction began and everything seemed to progress easy at first. However, strange occurrences soon began to fall on the workers. Tools would go missing, and they said that there would be shadows moving within the house, and blood was discovered smeared on the walls. Even stranger were the tracks found in the sand around the house leading from the west towards the Badlands. My uncle, an experienced hunter, couldn't identify these tracks, so he looked for help with my grandpa, who also found them perplexing. Eventually, my grandma intervened, recognizing the signs of a skinwalker. She instructed my uncle on the necessary precautions, and work on the house stopped until this issue could be resolved. Despite being careful, strange events continued to happen in the house, but my uncle pressed on. He eventually completed the house. And even yet, the disturbances persisted, driving his family to discomfort and fear. Even my grandmother's attempts to calm the spirit seemed futile against whatever forces were at play. On one specific evening, my cousins and I stayed over, and we experienced firsthand the strange nature of this house. The generator was shut off, and then strange noises echoed through the darkness, and it almost felt like some presence seemed to stalk us from the shadows. Only the intervention of my grandparents, armed with traditional remedies and fierce determination, brought us relief from all of this. Another incident involved my younger cousin. She was alone in the truck outside, and she said as she looked to the west side of the house, she saw a pale, humanoid figure peering down at her with dark, soulless eyes. Her screaming alerted the family to come outside, but this creature could vanish before they could confront it. Even with my grandmother, a woman of great strength, she had vowed to confront whatever was there and expelled it from the house. My grandma was very traditional and practiced native medicine. She also used sacred crystals to find and heal people. While looking into her crystals, she would also practice reading people's hands. There's been a few instances where she has been used to locate missing people and also found the circumstances of the way the person died. She also had knowledge of the evil way, the dark practice of witchcraft. In need of medicine, my grandma had to acquire a few secret items and would seek help from another medicine man. They both went into the house and began a ceremony to expel whatever was in it. They went into each room, blessing them with sage and sealing them with ash. When they finally went into the master bedroom, the medicine man started to vomit and bleed from the nose. My grandma said that she had a nauseous feeling and felt dizzy, almost fainting. They both retreated from the room and closed the door, sealing it with ash. The medicine man said the room was the source of evil, attracting evil spirits, including skinwalkers. He said he would try to pinpoint where the evil was coming from, but would need to go in alone. He began by lighting up a medicine bundle, taking bitter root, and marking his forehead with ash before entering the room. He described the room as very cold, feeling the presence of numerous spirits in the closet. Upon opening the closet, he saw a black mist on the floor, swirling like the eye of a black hurricane. He began the ceremony to close the portal, but was met with resistance. The medicine man heard a voice from the swirling mass, telling him that only the one who summoned the evil could close the portal. However, he continued the ceremony, and the mass started to diminish and eventually disappeared. Blessing the room with sage and corn pollen, he attached the burnt log to the top of the interior of the closet and sealed the door with ash. He warned my grandma that whatever was summoned was evil and too strong to keep under control, and so his recommendation was that my uncle abandon the house. Despite the warnings, my aunt, her boyfriend, and their 3-year-old son moved into the house, believing it to be a perfectly good place to save money on rent payments. However, they soon encountered paranormal experiences. One evening, my aunt heard footsteps walking down the hallway, followed by something crawling into bed with her and her son. Whatever it was, quickly got out of bed, threw off the covers, and stepped on her boyfriend's neck, causing him to choke for air. They then decided to leave the house immediately, leaving their belongings behind. Later, my younger Uncle Max and his friend Leo decided to spend the night at the house to investigate. While they were there, they experienced a terrifying encounter with different spirits, including that of a little girl and a faceless figure, making them flee the house in fear. Even after these encounters, the house has remained vacant, with strange occurrences continuing to happen, such as lights turning on despite the lack of electricity. Despite the warnings and strange events, the house stands abandoned with its curtains drawing open, as if someone is still inside watching. I live in the downtown area of a major Texas city. To get away from the city and enjoy the outdoors and some alone time, I would make the hour-and-a-half drive almost every weekend to a small cabin that's in the woods owned by my family. I've been hanging out at that cabin in those woods almost my entire life, so I feel pretty comfortable there. The area doesn't have many people living there, and it's always safe. So one weekend, I took some of my friends out there to fish and spend some time away from the city while fishing on the bank of the river that runs near my folks' cabin. We pulled up some chairs, started a fire, drank a few beers, and watched the sun go down behind the trees. That is life. After sitting around for a few hours, I suggested we go hunting the next morning for breakfast. The guys weren't big fans of waking up early, to crawl around in the woods looking for something to eat. They would have rather stayed up all night drinking and fishing and wake up late the next day. "Let's just go hunting right now," said one of them. Everyone else agreed and started getting loud. I stayed put in my chair and replied, "Hell no, it's too late, it's too dark. We wouldn't be able to see a thing out there. Plus, there's those dang witches." Everyone knew I made a good point, but then one of them said, "Wait, what do you mean by witches? What are witches anyway? Like seriously?" I laughed a bit, because they all seemed so intrigued and all of a sudden so focused. So I began telling the story of the last time I went camping and hunting in the woods around my parents' cabin. It was just like any other camping hunting trip I had gone out on. I packed a backpack with all the necessities, a .22 long rifle, an MMP, and a .45 that I would always carry. I parked my truck at my parents' place and walked down the dirt road until it disappeared into the woods. I appoint not to overhunt in any one area, so I hiked in direction I knew I had never hunted in. After a few hours of hiking, I found a clearing in the woods that allowed some moonlight once it got dark. I don't use a tent when I camp alone, so setting up my camp was fairly easy. I got a fire going and quickly went to go find some small game for dinner before it got too dark. After bagging a few squirrels and a rabbit, I started to head back to my campsite. The night had already started to settle in, so it was getting quite dark on me. I took a moment to light up my lantern that was hanging off my backpack. I poured some lantern oil on it and got it going. A few hundred yards later, I heard a movement in the distance. Obviously, while moving through the woods with a backpack with a rifle strapped to it, you make a lot of noise yourself. However, the noises that came from deeper in the trees have a distinct sound, almost like an echo. So when I heard movement coming from somewhere else other than myself, I froze, staying completely still and listening. There was nothing. My brain started reasoning as fast as it could and concluded that a branch might had fallen or a deer might had gotten spooked and hightailed it out of the area. That was good enough for me, so I continued on through the dark in the direction I knew my campsite was in. The compasses don't lie, and I had learned how to use them and rely on them by this point in my life. I heard it again, noises coming from my right, north of where I was, and this time I almost thought I heard a yell of some kind again. I froze, thinking it was coyotes. I'm not too worried about them. So I continued. The way back was starting to feel really long though, but hiking through the woods during the day is very different than hiking through the woods at night. Most of the time you hike slower, watching your steps more carefully. So it's not unusual that a hike the same distance could take longer at night than during the day. Before I go on, I feel like I should say that I was recently married at the time, most likely less than a year at that point. Like I wrote before, I travel a lot throughout my life, and homesickness was not something I was familiar with until I met my wife. I'll call her Juliet. We met when we were both 18, and up until then, I had never missed my home or anyone whenever I was away. But once we started dating, I began to finally experience the feeling of being homesick whenever I was away for too long, and in some cases, not even long at all. That Friday evening, towards the woods I had left, I got home from work and sat down with Juliet for dinner before leaving. It had only been a few hours since I last saw Juliet, and yet I missed her so badly out here in these woods. So much so that I think I almost felt pain. Having said that, I think it's going to make what happened next a little more creepy. Anyways, so I heard something. I froze and stood still in the dark woods and turned to my right. I was deeply confused because I knew what I just heard. It was Juliet calling me. Even though it sounded like she was a bit far, there was no doubt it was her. What the fuck is she doing out here? There's got to be some sort of emergency. I gotta find her. She's most likely been calling my phone, and it's not even on. Something bad must have happened, I thought, as my mind raced to rationalize and come up with a realistic conclusion. "Chip, Chip," she yelled through the trees in the distance. My name isn't Chip, but it's the secret nickname that she has for me. I basically jogged through the dark forest, towards where I last heard her calling me, stopping every now and then to listen for her again. Eventually I had to stop because I had not heard Juliet call out to me for a while. I stood there, quietly panicking for what must have been like 5 minutes, but every second was torturous. I felt like I failed to find my wife. Help her. She came all the way out here to find me because she needed me, and I couldn't even find my fucking way to her. And then, that's when I heard it again. Chip. Chip. Her voice quietly resonated through the tall trees, and she sounded like she was in pain. I began to walk as quietly as I could towards her so I could hear her as she called out to me again. And she did. She sounded very much closer, and I was relieved as I felt myself getting closer and closer to her. Chit. Chit. This time I was alarmed. I felt like I was about to be in danger, but I shook it off and continued towards my wife. Chit. Again, I kept listening to her calling me, but she didn't sound quite right. It almost sounded like it wasn't her at all. Just like two different people can say the same things in the same pitch and tone, but they can never sound exactly like each other. It was like there was someone else pretending to be my wife, and it was mimicking her voice, but I could hear her so clearly just a few moments ago. I figure she was choking up, trying not to cry, so I kept moving. Again and again, I heard my wife calling out to me as I kept getting closer and closer. Each time she called, though, her voice sounded less and less like her. By the time she sounded like she was only 10 or so yards away, I was on high alert. It sounded nothing like her by then. Whoever it was calling me wanted me to believe she was my wife, and by then, I knew for sure it wasn't her. I approached carefully with my handgun drawn. This person wasn't moving one bit, but I could tell where she was. I started getting closer, inch by inch, holding my lantern up in front of me, trying to see who I was dealing with. Then, peeking from around the tree, I saw two eyes reflecting the flame from my lamp. I have to admit, at that moment, I was fucking terrified. My wife is shorter than I am, and I was eye to eye with whoever this was, and her eyes were too far apart to have been Juliet's eyes. "Hey, is everything all right?" I asked her like an idiot. "I can give you anything you want." I knew right away what she really was. I knew her malicious intentions. Jesus, help me. I sat under my breath in a fearful whisper. With my gun still in my hand, I safely aimed towards the ground with my finger off the trigger. As soon as those words left my mouth, she visibly flinched, as if she had smelled something disgusting. I could tell by her silhouette and the reflections in her eyes, though. I stood still, realizing what I had just said, while she backed away from me back into the darkness. Up until this point during my story, my buddy sat staring at me, completely silent, listening to me speak. "Dude, why the fuck didn't you just shoot her? You had a gun, didn't you?" said the youngest guy. I told him it would have been useless to shoot the witch out there. It wouldn't have killed her or done any harm to her. "How? Why?" he replied. I began to explain to them what witches really are. People who practice witchcraft and offer rituals to demons they conjure in return for something they want. My theory was that this witch achieved her position through the sacrifice of people and animals. I could tell they were thinking it over and trying to decide whether to believe me or not. And to those listening, I know y'all might think this is crazy and not believable, and if I hadn't seen it at all before, I myself wouldn't even believe it. But the truth is, my parents were and still are very prominent figures in the church I grew up in. Being elders of the church community, they often performed exorcisms when I was a kid. And no, I don't mean the stereotypical Hollywood Catholic priest, with a little white thing on his neck under a black jacket holding up a wooden cross. They belonged to a Hispanic Protestant denomination that in fact disagreed with and opposed Catholicism. Being too young to stay home alone, I was often taken with my parents on house calls to pull demons out of people. It was a horrible experience every single time. In Latino America culture, it's not uncommon for people and their kids to visit witch doctors, or even doctors who heal when somebody is feeling sick, or when they want their lives to move in a better direction, and sometimes when they want harm to come upon someone who has wronged them. However, being part of these rituals is like an open invitation for demons and leaves people open to demonic activity. So there was always someone in need of help in our community. I watched and listened to everything my parents did during exorcisms, and I had read every book my dad kept in his office about the subject. By the time I had this incident in the woods, I already knew what to do and what not to do very well. I continued my story after explaining a bit more to my buddies. As I was saying, I stood in the dark forest with my lamp held up. with my arms stretched out until I could no longer see or hear the witch backing away. My adrenaline took a while to finally settle down. Then, that's when the fear came. I tried walking back to my campsite quietly, but my nerves got the best of me and I ended up almost running through the darkness. I was pretty confident I could find my way back, but either way, I kept checking my compass. After running and running in the correct direction, I never reached my campsite. I felt confused and doubted myself like never before. Maybe I really don't know anything about being out in the woods. How could I have gotten myself so lost? I turned around and walked until I saw a familiar pattern in the trees. Once I felt confident about where I was, I forced myself to walk back to where I ran into that witch. When I found the tree she was initially hiding behind, I stared at it for a good while, expecting her to peek around it again. But nothing. Thankfully, I retraced my steps back to where I had gone off the path to follow Juliet's voice. After hiking a bit longer, I found my campsite. I was exhausted, covered in sweat, scratched up and hungry. I considered packing everything up and starting on the long walk back to the cabin, but I had no energy, so I called it a night. I didn't even sleep much, even though I felt entirely drained. The woods were very loud that night, even by a summer night standard. The bugs and animals didn't stop to take a breath for a second, and the owls were very aggressive as well. I could hear them screaming near and far all night. Every time I began to drift off to rest, I would get awakened to the screams of the owls, echoing in the forest, or at least that's what I assumed to be. I turned to look at the guys and asked them if they were still down to creep into the woods. They looked at each other and said, "Yes. Well, yeah, go ahead. I'm not going in there right now," I said, laughing to myself. "But it didn't even do anything to you. You scared her away." One of them replied, "Maybe. But it's only because I said the name of Jesus." I said, "Well, just say it again if she comes back, dude." He said, almost annoyed, "It's not that simple. I think you really have to believe for that to work. And I can say I really did believe back then. But now, I won't be calling on anyone to come help me." After I said that, I don't remember much about the night. Other than that, all of us ended the night by watching Blood Diamond in the cabin. It's the only movie that my parents have in there. I think it was already there when they bought the place. As for what I said about believing, I'm not 100% sure it's right. Most demons hate God and Jesus, and I'm not sure if they care if you believe in God or not. It's not that I don't believe in God anymore. However, the only reason I do believe is because I've seen the other side of things. That witch that I saw knew what I loved and what I missed, and that I would have done anything for my wife. I have seen, encountered, and even felt evil, but I have never felt God. This is my true Skinwalker story. At the time of this experience, I had no knowledge, nor had I ever heard about a Skinwalker. I was 19 years old, and I lived in Phoenix, Arizona with my parents while attending community college. My sister-in-law had asked me to go with her to Tuba City, Arizona, to visit with her mother and pick up some papers. Her mother was a school teacher there on the Navajo res. We would be staying there overnight. Her mother lived in one of those small government houses on the res. There were about 3 or 4 houses near her on a small paved street, except for a few buildings near there. It was pretty isolated. My niece and nephew were with us, and we'll call my sister-in-law Mary, my nephew Mike, and my niece Amy. Mike was only 10 years old and Amy was 9. It was early evening when we arrived in Tuba City. We had stopped at a fast food restaurant on the way to pick up dinner to go. After arriving at the house, we all laid together at a small kitchen table. We talked and visited a while before going into the small living room to watch TV. There wasn't a lot to do there, so Mary and I decided we would take a night drive and explore around the res. I know what you're thinking. It's a very bad idea or a stupid idea. We drove around for about an hour and a half. Surprisingly, nothing weird happened. We were just laughing, talking, and listening to music as we drove up and down the dirt roads. After a while, we decided to head back. When arriving back home, we stayed up a little bit later, and then we decided it was time to go to bed. I slept in a small back bedroom on a twin bed next to a window with blinds. My nephew Mike slept on the floor in a sleeping bag in the same room. Mary and Amy were in the other room down the hallway. During the night, I was awakened by some strange scratching noises outside the window by my bed. It sounded like something was making long, slow clawing sounds down the window, like when someone runs their nails down a chalkboard. I am a light sleeper, so this of course woke me up. I whispered out loud to my nephew Mike to wake up, asking him if he was hearing the same thing I was. Mike was sleepy and groggy, being awakened from a deep slumber, so he seemed confused at first. I asked him again if he had heard the scratching noise, but he didn't answer. He was just out of it. He then laid back down and was out like a light. I was perplexed and a little scared. I thought to myself maybe it was just a stray cat or dog, but I couldn't figure it out. I did, however, have no indication to look out that window, so I just lay there listening. After a few minutes, the clawing stopped. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I mentioned this at the kitchen table during breakfast, but no one seemed very interested. We left later that afternoon and I never even thought about it again. 6 months later, I was attending one of my college courses. The teacher was lecturing us about different legends and stories of the Navajo people. He touched on the stories of evil medicine men, or witches, that are called Skinwalkers. He began telling us that they are very dangerous and harmful. They have the ability to turn into or disguise themselves as any animal. They could take the form of a coyote, wolf, or even a bear. They've also been known to follow people home at night. That's why you should never be out on the res after dark. You're never supposed to make eye contact with a skinwalker because it can actually possess your soul. You should never talk about them because you can draw them to you. They can cause issues and bring evil into your life. An icy chill went down my spine. I remember that night I had spent on the res. I wonder if a skinwalker had followed Mary and me home that night after our drive. The realization that a skinwalker had targeted us fills me with fear. I think of this often, and I'm so glad I didn't look out the window that night. I'm also haunted by the fact that there was just a very thin pane of glass separating me from such an evil thing, and now I guess I know why no one in the family wanted to talk about it. When I was a kid, my favorite time of the year had to be winter. It was just something about all the festivities that gave me a sense of wonder. It might sound a little cliché, or possibly a little cringy, but to me as a kid, the holidays felt magical. I would spend my winters watching my family put up all sorts of decorations around the house. Lights, ribbons, and I can't forget about the star attraction, the Christmas tree. My father and I had this tradition. Every year, we would venture out to our local tree farm, and he would let me run around and select our very own Christmas tree. It was one of the few times that my father and I had a chance to bond. He would tell me all these stories about his past, and how his own father would take him. Even though my father wasn't one to show emotion, I could tell that these trips to the Christmas tree forest actually meant the world to him. As the years progressed, my love for Christmas kinda diminished. I suppose that's something that just happens over the years. People get old, develop a new interest and responsibilities. During high school, I honestly couldn't care less about Christmas. To me, it was starting to just become another day, another pointless get-together with people whom I barely even know or remember. Maybe it was those rebel teenage years, but I just couldn't see the point anymore. That must have been the reason my parents stopped putting so much effort as they used to. Eventually, my father stopped offering to go Christmas tree shopping with me, and the holiday just sort of fell by the wayside. During my senior year in high school is when I met Sarah. She was incredible and we instantly clicked. A few months after meeting, we began dating. Early into our relationship, I realized fairly quickly that her family took Christmas very serious. Every year I was amazed by all the decorations and how much they loved Christmas. It was honestly like something out of a Christmas movie. As time went by, Sarah and I moved in together. We had lived in different apartments over the years until finally we had saved up enough money to buy a house in the suburbs. As the years started drawing to a close and the winter holidays were fast approaching, I wanted to try and rekindle my old love for Christmas. Once December came around, we went out and I bought a ton of decorations. We filled up the house from wall to wall with many different items. Decorations in every size hung in all the windows and also on the doors. The lights had been strung up around the exterior of the house. It was most likely a bit too much, but I still had fun putting all the decorations up. Sarah and I had talked about what we were going to do about the Christmas tree. She offered to go buy a synthetic one at a store somewhere, but I told her I had a better idea. I explained to her about a weekend that my father used to take me tree shopping, and I told her how it used to be my favorite part of Christmas. Without missing a beat, she asked me when I wanted to go. We made plans to go shopping for when at the end of the week, and I'll be honest, that made me feel happiness I hadn't felt in years. Friday had arrived, and after getting home from work, Sarah asked me if I still wanted to go. I nodded, and with a smile, she grabbed her coat. We headed back out into the winter air and hopped into my truck. We drove for hours trying to find a decent tree farm. A few of them had already sold out, which was quite shocking to me. And other tree farms, well, their selection didn't look too great. After driving for nearly 45 minutes, we found a place. As we pulled into the lodge, the tires of my truck struggled to get any traction in the snow. Our shoes were crunching into the falling snow, and we walked up to the gate. The trees that stood before us seemed to stretch in every direction. Sitting off to the side was an older man who seemed to be reading a book by a portable heater. Sarah and I walked over to him, and he struggled to peel his eyes away from his book. In an effort to be funny, I asked him if he had any treats for sale. But the look that he gave me over the edge of his book didn't seem to be amused. With a heavy sigh, he rested his book into his lap and pointed out to the trees. Then he said, "Find one you like and come let me know, and then I'll get it for you." I said thank you, and entered through the gate with Sarah following closely behind me. As we entered the forest, we both stared in wonder at all the options. Sarah quickly called me over and asked if this tree would be good. The tree was kind of tall to fit into our house. It was a great tree, but it was too big for the living room. We continued walking, looking around for that perfect tree. After a while, I realized I could no longer see the light from the entrance. The shift in the air was chill, and the warm glow of the light bulbs had been replaced by the cold moonlight overhead. Sarah rubbed her arms in an effort to stay warm, and I was beginning to realize that we needed to decide on a tree pretty quickly before one of us freezes out here. Then we saw it. The perfect tree, only a few yards ahead of us. I grinned as we got closer, but as I was getting closer and closer, I heard Sarah whisper for me to stop. My feet stopped in place, and I turned back to look at her to see what was wrong. Sarah was staring off into the distance, her face more pale than I had ever seen before. I asked her what was wrong, but she didn't answer. She just kept staring. I followed her gaze and saw what she was looking at. Between a few trees off in the distance, two eyes were looking right back at us. The shadows cast by the trees around it were obscuring its body, but its eyes seemed to pierce through the darkness. I looked back to Sarah, and she managed to whisper, saying that we should leave. I turned back to look at the eyes in the darkness. They were still there, still wide, and still staring directly at us. Then the eyes began to move out from the trees. As they did, they started to rise higher and higher above the ground. After a few seconds, the eyes were nearly half as tall as the tree it stood next to. It stepped out into the moonlight, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Its body was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It looked like some kind of beast. Dark fur covered it from its head to its toes. Massive clawed hands gripped the tree next to it, and I could see the tree strained from the pressure. Large horns were protruding out from its head, curling up and back from its body. It exhaled a deep breath through its nostrils. The gust of warm air visibly obscured its face for a moment. It took another step closer. The twigs beneath its feet were crunching loud as it approached. I could see its face a little bit better now. A dark liquid dripped from its lower jaw, staining the pure white snow beneath it. Sarah took a step back, and I could hear a twig snap below her foot. I turned my attention to her, and she was nearly crying at this point. The twig snapping was like a trigger. The creature started to roar, and it drew my attention back. That's when it started to run at us. But it wasn't running like a fucking animal. It was running like a person. And looking at this, my eyes went wild with panic, and I turned to Sarah, yelling at her to run. We both began sprinting through the snow, dodging the numerous trees as they passed us by. Even though we were both running as hard as we could, I could still hear that thing's footfalls growing closer and closer to us. Then, the sound of splintering wood echoed from behind us. I turned just in time to see a massive tree falling towards us with immense speed. I called out to Sarah to look out, and she moved away from me when I did the same thing as well. The tree impacted the ground, and it shook the earth beneath my feet. I called for Sarah, asking if she was all right, and for a moment there was no answer. I called again, and that's when a response came. I ran around the fallen tree, and I found her sitting near another tree. I held out my hand and helped her up. That's when we heard another loud shriek coming from deep in the woods. We looked to one another before running out of the forest back into the light of the entrance. The old man looked up from his book and asked us if we found one we liked. but we paid him little mind as we ran out of the fence, hopped into my truck, and drove away. There's quite a bit of few different things in this world that I can't explain, and that night is at the very top of this list. I have no idea what that thing was. Maybe some of you out here have an idea, but I'm at a complete loss. I still love the holidays and Christmas. But this year, I think I'm just going to buy an artificial Christmas tree, and I would advise all of you to do the same. Stay away from the forest, and be careful when you go in there if you go in there to look for a Christmas tree. Last Monday, I went on a walk into the woods. I go out of time, whether it's spring or winter. I'm 18 years old. I'm not very tall and I don't weigh much, so I'm a pretty fast runner too. Sometimes it can get really creepy out there in the woods. My mom and grandparents, they live right down the road by the way, always told me that if I start to feel unsafe out there, I always need to leave. They never said why, but I always figured they were afraid of the coy dogs and it never seemed that important. I did listen to them though, so Monday afternoon, maybe a bit past 4 o'clock, I left to go walking. I had been out there just 2 days before with no issues, but after walking for about half a mile, the feeling that I was being watched began. I kept walking until I came to the old logging road. It makes for a quick way around the woods, and it also connects to the road that my house and my grandparents' house are on. I was getting pretty tired of hiking through the snow-covered bushes and logs. I still felt like something was watching me, and just a few moments before I could have swore I saw something moving around from the corner of my eye. So I decided to walk down the logging road instead. As I was walking down it, I heard the sound of chains rattling nearby and started looking around for them. I was thinking maybe it was just chains in a tree blowing in the wind, but I couldn't find any chains and I stopped hearing it after a second. I kept walking and was getting close to my grandparents' land when I heard the chains again. I stopped walking to look around me and to check to see if maybe it was something I was wearing. My jacket, my necklace, but it wasn't anything on me. I jumped around to double check and maybe looked really stupid, but I knew it wasn't me making the noise. I decided just to go to my grandparents' house and walk back using the actual road, but as soon as I started heading into the woods, I heard something. It sounded like my own footsteps had been in time with a second pair that were maybe about 10 feet away, which made no sense, because there had been nothing there just a moment ago. I took another step and heard something step at the same time from behind me. I didn't turn around. I was too afraid, so I acted as if I was going to take another step, but I stopped my foot right above the snow. I wanted to make sure I wasn't going crazy. Behind me, whatever there was, stepped down. I heard a snow crunch, then it moved forward again, quickly. It must have known I figured out it was there. That's when I started running towards my grandparents' land, and whatever was behind me followed. It sounded humanish, and the sound of the chain started up again when it started chasing me. The thing definitely had only 2 legs, and it sounded pretty big. There's a lot of thorn bushes, small trees, and other things that stay around all year, even in the winter. When I ran between them as best as I could, it was just going right through them. I glanced behind me for a second, and all I saw was a really tall, gray humanoid blur before I looked back in front of me. The final stretch was terrifying. I could hear heavy breathing and chains rattling just a few feet behind me the entire time, and it sounded like it was almost growling. My grandparents' dog was up in the yard near the house and started barking, but he didn't run towards me. He just stayed by the house barking. Then he ran with me to the house when I got close to him. I ran up the door and went inside. The dog came in right beside me and I slammed the door shut. I didn't hear anything and I looked out the window, but there wasn't anything there. The dog was leaning onto me and shaking. My grandfather came to the door from upstairs after just a few seconds and I started crying and told him everything. He became very serious and told me, "Don't think about it. Just forget it ever happened." I tried to ask him why, but he refused to tell me anything. I tried asking my grandmother too, but she didn't say anything, and she changed the subject. When I was 13, I was on an ATV with my 2 older sisters, one 15 and the other 18. We were going to my grandma's place, which was less than 2 kilometers away from my parents' place. We were traveling through our fields, but on the way, I suggested we go around the fence so we didn't have to open the gates. It was pretty much the same road, just a bit off to the side, As we get to the middle of the field, we all notice something sitting on top of the hill we were about to climb. We slow to a crawl because it looked human. We thought maybe it was an animal that had fell and was stuck, or maybe it was my uncle who looked after the cattle. But this thing was sitting weird, basically like how Spider-Man perches over buildings, crouched down on top of a rock. I want to describe this thing. It was tall, skinny, was wearing nothing. Just a body is what we could see, grayish color, and the head wasn't shaped like a human's head. It was thin and small. We were about 30 to 40 meters from this thing, and it was during the day too. As we were sitting there trying to figure out what we were seeing, this thing slowly stood up, and my heart sank. Its arms were long, very long. I screamed to stop and instantly jumped from the front of the ATV to the driver, replacing my sister. As we were switching, this thing started running at us, but it was running weird. Its arms were swaying back and forth like normal runner. But because of how long the arms were, it looked weird. You would think it would run on the long arms, but it didn't, and it was running fast. I turned around and shot off straight through the field. My sisters were screaming that it was still coming, but to be honest, I could not look back at this thing. So I just said, "Don't look at it." We rounded the corner, and that's the last we saw of it. As we got home, I crashed the ATV into the deck, trying to get in as fast as we could. We were so scared my parents actually believed us. They called all the family to warn in case it was a trespasser. They said nobody saw anything or anyone